I woke up that morning with a flutter in my chest, the kind of nervous excitement I hadn't felt since my wedding day. Today was the day my first book launch. After months of late nights, endless edits, and pouring my soul onto every page, I was finally stepping into the world as an author. Could barely believe it. My hands trembled as I set out my favorite dress, the one my daughter once said made me look like someone important. I smiled at the memory, thinking how proud my kids would be to see me up on that stage. Reading from my own book, the house was unusually quiet, but I chalked it up to everyone sleeping in. I tiptoed downstairs, careful not to wake anyone, and started brewing coffee, rehearsing my speech in my head. I imagined my children in the front row, beaming, maybe even a little teary-eyed. I pictured them telling their friends, "That's my mom up there." For once, I wanted to be the one celebrated, the one they looked up to, not just the woman who packed their lunches and reminded them to do their homework. As the clock ticked closer to the event, I sent a quick group text. "Can't wait to see you all at the launch. This means the world to me." I waited for the flurry of heart emojis. "We're so proud of you, Mom." Instead, my phone stayed silent. I brushed it off, telling myself they were probably just getting ready. But deep down, a tiny seed of doubt began to grow. I had no idea that by the end of the day, my heart would be broken in a way I never expected, and that my family's absence would force me to question everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and what it means to show up for the people you care about. If you'd asked anyone who knew me, they'd probably say I was the kind of mother who never missed a moment. I was there for every scraped knee, every school play, every late-night phone call about forgotten homework or broken hearts. My life for so many years revolved around my children, Emma, my fiercely independent oldest, and Jake, my easygoing, charming youngest. From the moment they were born, I made a silent promise to always put them first, to be the anchor they could count on no matter what storms came our way. I remember the early years, when money was tight and time even tighter. I'd work double shifts at the library, then rush home to help with science projects or bake cupcakes for class parties. I became an expert at juggling work, home, their dreams, my own quiet hopes. There were nights I'd collapse into bed, exhausted, only to be woken by a child's nightmare or a fever that needed tending. I never complained. I told myself this was what love looked like, showing up again and again, even when no one noticed. As they grew older, my role shifted from caretaker to cheerleader. I was the loudest voice at soccer games, the shoulder to cry on after breakups, the steady presence in a world that often felt unpredictable. I watched them chase their own ambitions. Zama with her art, Jake with his music on, I cheered them on, even when it meant putting my own dreams on hold. I told myself there would be time for me later, once they were settled, once they didn't need me quite so much. But as the years passed, I started to feel invisible. The kids became teenagers, then young adults, and their worlds expanded beyond the walls of our home. Suddenly, I was the one waiting up for them, hoping for a text, longing for a sliver of their attention. I tried to remind myself that this was normal, that growing up meant growing apart, but the ache of being left behind was real. I missed the days when a scraped knee or a bad grade could be fixed with a hug and a few kind words. It was around this time that I started writing again. It began as a way to fill the quiet hours, to reclaim a part of myself I'd buried under years of motherhood. I wrote in secret at first, scribbling stories in the margins of grocery lists, typing late. At night, when the house was finally still, the words poured out of me, stories about women finding their voices, about mothers and daughters, about the complicated, beautiful mess of family. Writing became my lifeline, a way to remember who I was before I became mom. Still, I craved validation, not just as a writer, but as a person. I wanted my children to see me, not just as the woman who made their lives easier, but as someone with dreams and ambitions of her own. I longed for their support, for a moment when the roles would reverse and they would be the ones cheering me on. I imagined what it would feel like to have them in the audience, to see pride in their eyes, to hear them say, "We're proud of you, Mom." But even as I poured myself into my book, a part of me worried that I was asking for too much. But after all, Hadn't I taught them to chase their own dreams? Hadn't I always put their needs first? Maybe it was selfish to want something back. Maybe mothers weren't supposed to need applause. Still, as the launch day approached, I couldn't help but hope that, just this once, they would show up for me the way I had always shown up for them. And that hope, fragile as it was, would soon be put to the test in a way I never saw coming. The week leading up to the launch, it's a blur of nerves and last-minute details. I spent my days double-checking RSVPs, practicing my reading in front of the mirror, and fussing over what to wear. Every time I glanced at the stack of invitations on the kitchen counter, my heart would skip a beat. I'd written my children's names at the top of the guest list, underlined them twice, as if that would somehow guarantee their presence. Emma and Jake were both home that week, a rare occurrence now that they had their own busy lives. I tried to involve them in the preparations, hoping to share my excitement. "Would you two mind helping me set up the chairs at the bookstore?" I asked one evening over dinner, my voice light but hopeful. Emma barely looked up from her phone. "I think I have a thing with Maya that afternoon, but I'll see if I can make it," she said, her tone non-committal. Jake shrugged. "I'll try, Mom, but I might have band practice. Can't you just hire someone to help?" I laughed it off, masking the sting. "It's not about the chairs. It would mean a lot to have you both there." They nodded, but their attention drifted back to their screens. It's a conversation already forgotten. As the days ticked by, I found myself watching them more closely, searching for any sign that they understood how much this meant to me. I left a copy of my book on the coffee table, hoping they'd pick it up. Emma flipped through it once, pausing at the dedication for Emma and Jake, who taught me the meaning of unconditional love, before setting it aside with a distracted smile. Jake promised he'd read it soon, but I noticed it gathering dust. Untouched dot the night before the launch. I tried again. "Are you both excited for tomorrow?" I asked, forcing a brightness I didn't feel. Emma glanced at Jake, then back at me. "Yeah, Mom, it's great. You've worked really hard." Jake nodded. "Yeah, congrats, Mom." Their words felt rehearsed, like something they'd say to a distant relative at a family reunion. I wanted to believe they cared, but their lack of questions, their distracted responses, made me uneasy. I remembered all the times I'd sat through their recitals, their art shows, their endless games and performances, clapping until my hands hurt, beaming with pride even when they stumbled. I wondered if they remembered those moments, if they understood what it meant to show up for someone, even when it wasn't convenient. The morning of the launch, I woke up early, unable to sleep. I made pancakes, Emma's favorite, with blueberries, and Jake's with chocolate chips, hoping to create a sense of occasion. They came downstairs late, bleary-eyed and distracted. "Big day, Mom," Emma said, grabbing a pancake on her way. "Out the door? I'll text you later, okay?" Jake mumbled something about meeting friends before practice, promising he'd try to make it on time. I watched them leave, my heart heavy. I tried to shake off the disappointment, telling myself they were just busy, that they'd show up when it mattered. But as I stood alone in the kitchen, the silence felt deafening. Later that afternoon, I checked my phone obsessively, waiting for a message, a sign that they were on their way. Instead, I saw a photo pop up on Emma's social media picture of her and Jake smiling in fluffy white robes, faces aglow with mud masks. The caption read, "Sibling Spa Day. Much needed R&R before the weekend." My stomach dropped. I stared at the screen, willing it to be a mistake, a joke, anything. But what it was, I tried calling, but neither answered. I left a voicemail, my voice trembling. "Hey, just checking in. The launch starts in an hour. Hope to see you both there." I waited, pacing the living room, my nerves fraying with every passing minute, as the time for the launch drew closer. The bookstore filled with friends, colleagues, even a few strangers who'd read about the event online. But the two faces I longed to see were nowhere in sight. I kept glancing at the door, my heart leaping every time it opened, only to fall again when it wasn't them. Asterisk the anticipation, the hope, the mounting sense of dread. It all swirled inside me, threatening to spill over. I tried to focus on the event, on the people who had shown up, but a part of me was already bracing for the heartbreak I feared was coming. And as the clock struck the hour, I realized I was about to face my biggest moment alone, The day of the launch felt like a dream I'd been chasing for years, finally within reach. I woke up before dawn, my mind racing with excitement and nerves. I laid out my dress, the one I'd saved for a special occasion, and carefully applied my makeup, wanting to look my best for the photos I hoped my kids would take. I imagine Emma snapping candid shots, Jake making silly faces behind the camera, both of them laughing and cheering me on. I clung to that image as I rehearsed my speech one last time, my hands trembling with anticipation. The bookstore was already buzzing when I arrived. The owner greeted me with a warm hug, and volunteers helped set up the chairs and arrange copies of my book in neat stacks. Friends from my writing group arrived early, offering flowers and words of encouragement. I smiled and thanked them, but my eyes kept drifting to the door, searching for the faces I wanted most to see. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart leaped. Maybe it was Emma, texting to say she was on her way. Maybe Jake had finished practice early and was coming to surprise me. But each time, it was just another well-wisher, another friend wishing me luck. I tried to focus on their kindness, but the absence of my children was a growing ache I couldn't ignore. As the start time approached, I checked my phone again. Still nothing from Emma or Jake. I scrolled through my messages, hoping I'd missed something, but there was only silence. I took a deep breath, telling myself they'd walk in any minute, that they wouldn't miss this for the world. I glanced at the clock, 15 minutes to go. Then, as I was straightening a stack of books, my phone lit up with a notification. It was a photo from Emma's Instagram story. I tapped it open, my breath catching in my throat. There they were, Emma and Jake, side by side in plush white robes, their faces covered in green mud masks, grinning at the camera. The caption read, "Sibling Spa Day. Self-care before the weekend." My heart plummeted. I stared at the screen, willing it to be a mistake, but the evidence was right there, broadcast for the world to see. A wave of disbelief washed over me, quickly followed by a sharp, stinging hurt. I felt exposed, as if everyone in the room could see the disappointment etched across my face. I excused myself and slipped into the restroom, locking the door behind me. My hands shook as I dialed Emma's number, but it went straight to voicemail. I tried Jake next, but he didn't pick up either. I left a message, my voice barely steady. "Hey, I saw your post. Thought you were coming to the launch. I really hoped you'd be here." I stared at my reflection in the mirror, searching for the woman I'd hoped to be today, confident, celebrated, surrounded by love. Instead, I saw someone small and foolish, someone who dared to hope for too much. I wiped away a tear, careful not to smudge my makeup, and forced myself to breathe. When I returned to the main room, the event was about to begin. The bookstore was full, the energy warm and supportive, but I felt hollow inside. I took my place. At the podium, the words of my speech suddenly heavy on my tongue. I looked out at the crowd, searching for my children's faces, but all I saw were empty chairs in the front row. I began to read, my voice steady, but my heart breaking with every word. I told myself to focus on the people who had shown up, too. Be grateful for their support, but the absence of Emma and Jake was a wound that throbbed with every passing minute. I wondered if anyone could see the pain behind my smile, if they knew how much it hurt to be celebrated by strangers, while being forgotten by the people who mattered most. As the applause faded and the event drew to a close, I felt a strange numbness settle over me. I signed books, posed for photos, accepted congratulations with practiced grace. But inside, I was unraveling. I knew the real confrontation, the real reckoning, was still to come. And as I packed up my things and prepared to go home, I couldn't help but wonder if anything between us would ever be the same. The drive home from the bookstore was a blur. I kept replaying the day in my mind, the applause, the kind words from friends, the empty front row. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white, fighting back tears that threatened to spill over. I wanted to feel proud, to savor the moment I'd worked so hard for. But all I could think about was the spa photo and the silence from my children. When I walked through the front door, the house was filled with the faint scent of lavender and eucalyptus. I heard laughter drifting from upstairs, Ma and Jake, home from their day of self-care. For a moment, I stood in the hallway, my bag still slung over my shoulder, listening to them joke and tease each other as if nothing had happened. The sound was both comforting and infuriating. I set my things down and called up the stairs, my voice sharper than I intended. Emma, Jake, can you come down here, please? There was a pause, then the thud of footsteps. They appeared at the top of the stairs, faces flushed and relaxed, wrapped in matching spa robes. Emma smiled. Hey, Mom, how was the launch? Her casual tone was like a slap. I stared at them, searching for any sign of guilt or regret, but saw only obliviousness. How was the launch? I repeated, my voice trembling. It was fine. It would have been better if my own children had bothered to show up. Jake's smile faltered. Mom, we told you we might not make it. We needed a break. It's been a stressful week for both of us. Emma nodded. Yeah, and you know how much I hate big crowds. I figured you'd have plenty of people there anyway. I felt my anger rising, hot and sharp. You both knew how important this was to me. I've spent months working on this book, and I wanted you there. Not just anyone you. I wanted my family to be proud of me, to support me the way I've always supported you. Emma rolled her eyes, crossing her arms. Mom, it's not that big of a deal. You're making this into something it's not. We said congratulations, didn't we? Isn't that enough? I stared at her, stunned by her indifference. No, Emma, it's not enough. A text or a congrats isn't the same as showing up. I've been there for every important moment in your lives. I just wanted you to be there for mine. Jake shifted uncomfortably, glancing at his sister. We didn't think you'd take it so personally. We just needed some time to relax. You're always telling us to take care of ourselves. I shook my head, the hurt settling deep in my chest. Taking care of yourself doesn't mean abandoning the people who love you. I needed you today. I needed to feel like I mattered to you, not just as your mother, but as a person with dreams of her own. For a moment, no one spoke. The silence was thick, heavy with all the things we'd never said. I saw the confusion in their eyes, the gap between my expectations and their reality. To them, the launch was just another event, something that could be missed and made up for later. To me, it was a culmination of years of sacrifice, a chance to be seen and celebrated. Emma finally broke the silence, her voice softer. I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't realize it meant that much to you. I just thought, I don't know, I thought you'd understand. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. I do understand. I understand that I've spent so long putting everyone else first that maybe I forgot to teach you how to put others first, too. Maybe I made it look too easy. Jake stepped forward, guilt flickering across his face. We messed up, Mom. I'm sorry, really. Their apologies hung in the air, sincere, but incomplete. The hurt didn't magically disappear, and the distance between us felt wider than ever. I realized then that this wasn't just about a missed event. It was about years of unspoken expectations, of love given and not always returned in the ways I needed. As I stood there, surrounded by the echoes of our confrontation, I knew something had shifted. The old patterns wouldn't work anymore. I couldn't keep giving without asking for what I needed in return. And as much as it hurt, I also knew this was the beginning of a new chapter 1, where I would have to learn how to show up for myself, even if no one else did. That night, after the confrontation, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying every word, every look, every ache. The house was quiet, but inside me, a storm raged. I kept thinking about all the years I'd spent making sure everyone else was okay, smoothing over disappointments, swallowing my own needs for the Munties' sake of peace. I realized with a clarity that was both painful and liberating that I couldn't keep living that way, not if I wanted to feel whole. The next morning, made myself a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, the sunlight streaming in through the window. I opened my journal, the one I'd used to write the first draft of my book, and began to write not stories for others, but a letter to myself. I wrote about my dreams, my disappointments, my longing to be seen. I wrote about the launch, the empty chairs, the way my heart had broken, and how, somehow, I was still here. By the time I finished, I felt lighter, as if I'd finally given myself permission to feel everything I'd been holding back. When Emma and Jake came downstairs, I didn't rush to make them breakfast or ask about their plans. Instead, I looked at them, really looked at them, and said, I love you both, but I need to start loving myself too. I can't keep giving and giving without asking for what I need in return. I need you to understand that showing up matters, not just for me, but for anyone you care about." They looked surprised, maybe even a little hurt, but I didn't back down. For the first time, I set a boundary not out of anger, but out of self-respect. "I'm going to take some time for myself today," I said, grabbing my bag and my favorite book. "I need to celebrate what I accomplished, even if it's just me." I spent the afternoon at a quiet cafe, savoring a slice of cake and reading the glowing reviews my book had started to receive online. I let myself feel proud, not just for finishing the book, but for finally choosing myself. I realized that my worth wasn't tied to who showed up for me, but to the fact that I'd shown up for myself. That evening, when I returned home, the atmosphere felt different. Emma and Jake were quieter, more thoughtful. Emma handed me a card she'd made filled with words she hadn't been able to say out loud. Jake offered to cook dinner, a small gesture, but one that spoke volumes. Cook? I could see the shift in their eyes, a new awareness, a recognition that things had changed. I knew it wouldn't be easy. Setting boundaries meant risking disappointment, facing uncomfortable truths, and letting go of the fantasy that love always looks the way we want it to. But it also meant making space for my own dreams, my own happiness. I was no longer willing to disappear into the background of my own life. As I sat with my children that night, sharing a simple meal, I felt a quiet strength growing inside me. I didn't know exactly what the future would hold, but I knew this: I was done waiting for permission to matter. I was ready to write the next chapter of my life, one where I was the main character, not just the supporting cast. And maybe, just maybe, my family would learn to meet me there in the weeks that followed. The air in our home shifted in subtle but unmistakable ways. I noticed it first in the quiet moments: Seema lingering a little longer at the kitchen table, Jake asking about my next project with genuine curiosity. There was an awkwardness at first, a sense that we were all learning a new language, one where my needs and boundaries were finally part of the conversation. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. I started carving out time for myself, unapologetically. I joined a local writers group, something I'd always wanted to do, but never dared. I spent afternoons at the library, lost in books that inspired me, and evenings working on my next manuscript. I stopped waiting for my children's approval or attention to validate my efforts. Instead, I learned to celebrate my own milestones, no matter how small. The more I honored my own dreams, the more I felt myself coming alive. Emma and Jake noticed the change, even if they didn't always understand it. There were moments of friction, bristling when I declined to drop everything for her last-minute plans, Jake sulking when I missed one of his gigs because I had a reading of my own. But there were also moments of connection that felt deeper than before. Emma surprised me by attending one of my book signings, sitting quietly in the back and giving me a shy thumbs up when I caught her eye. Jake started leaving notes on my desk, funny doodles, little messages of encouragement. It wasn't the grand gestures I'd once dreamed of, but it was honest, and it was enough. I realized that loving my children didn't mean losing myself. I could be their mother and still be my own person. I could support them without sacrificing my own happiness. It was a bittersweet lesson, letting go of the fantasy that my family would always show up exactly as I hoped. But in that letting go, I found a new kind of freedom, a space where I could breathe, create, and grow. There were still pangs of sadness, moments when I wished things had unfolded differently. Sometimes I'd see other families at events, clustered together, and feel a flicker of envy. But I reminded myself that every family is a work in progress, a story still being written. I learned to cherish the small steps, the imperfect efforts, the ways we were all trying to do better. Most importantly, I learned to show up for myself. I became my own biggest supporter, my own source of pride. I stopped measuring my worth by who was in the audience and started measuring it by the courage it took to stand on that stage in the first place. My relationship with Emma and Jake grew stronger, not because they changed overnight, but because I did. I stopped asking them to fill the empty spaces inside me and started filling them myself. As I finished the final chapter of my next book, I looked around at the life I was building, not just as a mother, but as a woman with dreams, boundaries, and a voice of her own. I knew there would be more challenges, more disappointments, but I also knew I was strong enough to face them. I was no longer waiting for my family to show up for me. I had learned to show up for myself, and in doing so, I'd given my children permission to do the same. And that, I realized, was the real story, the one I'd been waiting to write all along. Looking back, I realized that the day of my book launch was never just about a single event. It was a turning point in how I saw myself and my place in my own story. For so long, I believed that love meant sacrifice, that being a good mother meant putting everyone else first, even if it meant losing pieces of myself along the way. But standing in that bookstore, facing an empty front row, I finally understood that self-worth can't be handed to us by others, not even by the people we love most. I learned that showing up for myself isn't selfish, it's necessary. It's the foundation for every other relationship in my life. When I stopped waiting for my children's approval and started honoring my own dreams, I discovered a strength I didn't know I had. I realized that I could be proud of myself, even if no one else was clapping. And in doing so, I gave my children a new example that it's okay to have needs, to set boundaries, to chase your own happiness. Family, I've learned, is complicated. We disappoint each other, we miss the mark, we grow in different directions, but we also have the chance to learn, to forgive, and to try again. My relationship with Emma and Jake isn't perfect, but it's more honest now. We're learning to see each other as whole people, not just as roles we play. And that honesty, even when it's uncomfortable, is what brings us closer in the end. If you're listening to this and you've ever felt invisible or unappreciated or like your dreams don't matter, please know you're not alone. Your story is worth telling. Your needs are worth honoring. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is show up for yourself, even if no one else does. I don't know what the next chapter holds. Maybe more book launches, maybe new adventures, maybe more hard lessons. But I do know this: I'm done waiting for permission to matter. I hope you'll join me in writing your own story, one where you are the hero, the author, and the audience all at once. And who knows, the best is yet to come.